Commander Zyxtal stood motionless in the observation chamber, his crystalline form refracting the soft blue light of Earth's atmosphere. After 3 centuries of preparation, the Vidranix Empire's most ambitious infiltration was about to begin. Their target, a seemingly unremarkable species on a seemingly unremarkable planet. "The preliminary scans are complete, Commander," reported Observer Prime Naira, her thoughts resonating directly into Zyxtal's consciousness. "The humans remain unaware of our presence." The commander's crystalline structure pulsed with satisfaction. The Vidranix had perfected the art of conquest through subtle manipulation over millions of years. Their psychic abilities allowed them to gradually influence species toward self-destruction or willing submission. Humans, with their primitive technology and fragmented societies, should have been trivially easy to subjugate. "Begin the first wave of observers," Zyxtal commanded. "Standard protocol: inhabit their leading minds, guide their decisions, prepare them for the Great Sleep." Across the globe, 300 of the Empire's finest psychic operatives descended into the minds of carefully selected humans. Politicians, scientists, business leaders, the ones whose decisions could gradually reshape human society. The operation had been meticulously planned, each step calculated with mathematical precision. Within 24 hours, the first troubling reports began arriving. "Commander," Naira's thoughts carried an unusual tremor of uncertainty. "We're receiving confused signals from the field operatives. They're reporting patterns that don't match any known species' behaviors." Zyxtal's form darkened with concern. "Explain." Observer Krell, inhabiting a human designated Professor Richardson at a leading research facility, reports that his host regularly ingests a bitter stimulant substance every morning, despite it causing obvious physical discomfort. When Krell attempted to suppress this behavior, the host became severely dysfunctional. "A chemical dependency?" Zyxtal questioned. "No, Commander. The substance they call coffee isn't physically addictive at the levels consumed. They simply prefer to be uncomfortable in the morning. And this is just the beginning of the anomalies." Over the next several days, the reports became increasingly bizarre. Humans would deliberately deprive themselves of sleep to engage in recreational activities. They would gather in large groups to watch others engage in physically strenuous competitions. They would spend hours of their limited lifespans organizing small physical objects into pleasing patterns, only to destroy and rebuild them. Most troubling of all, their minds proved remarkably resistant to subtle influence. The Vidranix observers could access memories and sensory information, but attempts to redirect thought patterns met with surprisingly strong subconscious resistance. "It's as if their minds are deliberately chaotic," reported senior observer Vax. "They maintain multiple contradictory beliefs simultaneously. They make decisions based on gut feelings that defy logical analysis. They periodically alter their entire lifestyle based on inspirational messages found on primitive information networks." Zyxtal called an emergency council of the mission's senior staff. The observation chamber hummed with the resonance of troubled thoughts. "The humans are able to function despite fundamental logical inconsistencies in their thinking," Naira summarized. "This presents a serious obstacle to our standard methods of influence. We cannot introduce subtle contradictions to destabilize their society because their society is already built on contradictions." "Surely there must be a pattern," Zyxtal insisted. "No species can achieve technological advancement without systematic thinking." "That's the most disturbing part, Commander," Vax interjected. "They achieve advancement through their inconsistency. They call it creativity, the deliberate combination of unrelated concepts to produce new ones. Our observers report experiencing significant mental strain simply trying to follow human thought processes." The council was interrupted by an urgent alert. 3 observers had gone silent, their psychic signatures vanishing from the network. When backup observers were sent to investigate, they found their colleagues still present in their human hosts, but fundamentally altered. "They've gone native," Naira reported with horror. They're not just observing human behavior anymore, they're participating in it. One of them spent an entire day helping their host perfect something called a sourdough starter. Zhuang's crystalline form pulsed with dark patterns of worry. This was unprecedented in the Empire's long history of conquest. The humans weren't just resisting influence, they were somehow influencing their influencers. Withdraw the compromised observers, he commanded. We need to reassess our entire approach. These humans, they're not what we thought they were. They're something else entirely. As the first day's cycle of observation ended, Zhuang stood alone in the chamber, watching the blue planet spin below. For the first time in his centuries of service to the Empire, he felt something alien stirring in his own thoughts, doubt. The invasion of Earth was not proceeding according to plan. And somewhere, in a small apartment in Seattle, a Vidronix observer was learning to enjoy coffee. The pattern that wasn't. The Vidronix research vessel's primary analysis chamber was in chaos. Holographic displays flickered with thousands of human behavior patterns, each defying categorization in its own unique way. Observer Prime Naira had spent the equivalent of 3 Earth weeks attempting to create a unified theory of human decision-making. The results were driving the ship's quantum computers to their limits. This makes no logical sense, she communicated to her research team. The same human who carefully plans their financial investments will also impulsively purchase what they call comfort food when experiencing emotional distress. They simultaneously exhibit extreme rationality and complete irrationality. Junior observer Rel, whose crystalline form had started showing stress fractures from prolonged human observation, projected a new dataset into the shared consciousness. Consider their morning rituals. Subject 2547, designated Thomas Wilson, sets an alarm device for what they call 6 a.m. He then proceeds to activate something called a snooze function exactly 4 times, causing him to wake up at 7 a.m. instead. Perhaps a malfunction in their timekeeping devices, another researcher suggested hopefully. No, Rel responded. They deliberately build this inefficiency into their wake-up process. When we attempted to influence Subject Wilson to wake up immediately at the first alarm, his entire day became destabilized. He reported feeling off and made several errors in his work tasks. Commander Zhuang entered the chamber, his usually pristine crystalline structure showing signs of distortion. The failed attempts to understand human behavior patterns were affecting the entire mission crew. Report, he commanded, though with less authority than usual. Naira projected a complex neural map into the shared space. Humans appear to operate on multiple simultaneous decision-making systems that regularly contradict each other. They call this being normal. Even more disturbing, they seem to draw strength from these contradictions. The display shifted to show a human artist working on a canvas. This subject spends her daylight hours working as a financial analyst, making precise mathematical calculations. Then she returns home and creates what they call abstract art, deliberate chaos rendered in pigments. Both activities appear to be essential to her psychological well-being. And our observers? Zhuang questioned. Deteriorating, Naira admitted. The longer they spend connected to human minds, the more they begin to exhibit human-like behaviors. Observer Krell has begun something called collecting vinyl records, physical discs of stored sound that are objectively inferior to digital recordings. When questioned, he insisted that they just sound better. The command chamber resonated with disturbed harmonics. The Vidronix Empire had conquered countless civilizations through their ability to impose logical order on chaos. But humanity's chaos seemed to be imposing itself on them instead. Most troubling, Rel added, is their resistance to optimization. When our observers attempt to improve human efficiency, the humans actively resist. A subject designated Jennifer Liu maintains a garden of decorative plants that serve no nutritional purpose. When we influenced her to replace them with practical vegetables, she became severely distressed until the flowers were restored. Zhuang's form pulsed with frustration. There must be a way to predict and control their behavior patterns. No species can advance technologically without some form of systematic thinking. That's just it, Commander, Naira responded. They advance because of their inconsistency, not despite it. Their technological innovations often come from what they call random thoughts or crazy ideas. They intentionally pursue paths that have no logical foundation. The display shifted to show a human child playing with small interlocking blocks. They train this behavior from an early age, encouraging their young to engage in purposeless creative activities. When our observers attempted to direct children toward more logical pursuits, the results were unsettling. Elaborate, Ziwextal commanded. The children proved even more resistant to influence than adults. Their minds operate in ways that our most experienced psychic operators cannot comprehend. Observer Mix attempted to understand a game called Make-Believe and suffered a complete psychological breakdown. He now insists on being called Mr. Spaceman and spends his observation time making engine noises with his mouth. The command chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Vidranix had assumed that humanity's apparent chaos was a sign of weakness. Instead, it appeared to be the source of their strength, a strength that was proving infectious to the observers themselves. Commander, Naira projected hesitantly, I believe we may need to consider the possibility that our fundamental assumptions about consciousness and progress were incomplete. Ziwixtal's form darkened with concern. In the vast history of the Empire, no such admission had ever been made. And somewhere in London, Observer Krell was explaining to his host's confused friends why vinyl records had better warmth and texture than digital audio. The pattern they were seeking wasn't just difficult to find, it wasn't there at all. And that absence was beginning to tear at the very foundation of Vidranix's understanding of the universe. Breaking points. The emergency alert resonated through the Vidranix vessel with a frequency that made its crystalline corridors vibrate. In the quarantine chamber, Observer Trix was experiencing what the humans would call a complete mental breakdown. Their once perfect crystalline form had become clouded and irregular, pulsing with chaotic patterns of light. I understand it now, Trix transmitted, their thoughts fragmented and tainted with human-like irregularities. The morning coffee, the illogical relationships, the collecting of functionless objects, it's all so beautiful in its meaninglessness. Commander Zyxtal and Observer Prime Naira watched through the chamber's containment field as their formerly excellent field operative continued to deteriorate. How many now? Zyxtal asked, though he dreaded the answer. 47 observers have experienced similar breaks from standard consciousness patterns, Naira reported. All after prolonged exposure to human thought processes. But Trix's case is different. Inside the chamber, Trix had begun arranging energy crystals in what they claimed was an aesthetically pleasing pattern, a concept that had no meaning in Vidranix culture before this mission. Different how? Trix was observing a human child, Naira explained. A 6-year-old female who spent her days engaged in an activity called imaginary tea parties with inanimate plush representations of Earth creatures. The commander's form darkened. A waste of cognitive resources. That's what Trix thought initially. They attempted to redirect the child toward more productive activities. The result was unexpected. Instead of influencing the child, Trix became drawn into what they called the tea party paradigm. They began to experience something humans called whimsy. Inside the chamber, Trix had started humming, a behavior that had no precedent in Vidranix history. Show me the final observation log, Zyxtal commanded. Naira projected the memory sequence into their shared consciousness. They watched as the human child, designated Ruby Bennett, orchestrated an elaborate social ceremony with her stuffed animals. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, the child simultaneously knew the objects were inanimate yet treated them as conscious beings. The ability to hold two contradictory thoughts simultaneously appears to be a fundamental human trait, Naira analyzed. But it's more than that. They draw power from it. The child's creativity actually increased when engaging in these logically impossible scenarios. And our observers cannot maintain their psychological integrity when exposed to this contradiction, Zyxtal concluded. Worse, Naira added. They begin to prefer it. We've had to forcibly withdraw 12 observers who refuse to leave their human hosts. Observer Krell, before we lost contact, transmitted that he had discovered something called jazz music and could no longer bear to live without it. The command chamber's displays showed more troubling data. Across the globe, Vidranix observers were going rogue in increasingly bizarre ways. One had taken up abstract painting. Another had begun writing what they called poetry, arrangements of words chosen for their acoustic properties rather than their logical meaning. The human children are the most dangerous, Naira continued. Their minds, they haven't yet learned to suppress their creativity with logic. Observer LYX spent 1 hour in the mind of a 4-year-old and emerged believing they could transform into something called a dinosaur princess. Zyxtal's form pulsed with distress. How do humans maintain their sanity with such chaos in their minds? That's just it, Commander. They don't view it as chaos. They have terms for it: imagination, creativity, dreams. They actively cultivate these illogical thought patterns. Their entertainment, their art, their music, it's all designed to maintain and enhance this capacity for controlled irrationality. The displays showed more evidence of the spreading contamination. Observers were reporting experiences of emotions, intuition, and other dangerous human thought patterns. Some had even begun to question the logical perfection of the empire itself. Most disturbing of all, Naira added, is their resistance to uniformity. When we attempted to standardize their behavior patterns, they responded by becoming even more individualistic. It's as if their entire species is engineered to resist psychic manipulation. In the quarantine chamber, Trix had begun what they claimed was a dance, a rhythmic movement pattern with no practical purpose. Their crystalline form sparkled with what could only be described as joy, a concept that had no translation in the Vidranix language. Commander, Naira transmitted hesitantly, I believe we must consider the possibility that the human psychological resistance isn't a flaw in their consciousness. It may be an evolutionary adaptation. One that makes them uniquely dangerous to our kind. Zyxtal watched as Trix continued their meaningless but somehow captivating movements. For the first time in his centuries of existence, he felt something stirring in his own consciousness, a dangerous hint of appreciation for the inexplicable. Quarantine all remaining observers, he commanded. And, record Trix's movement patterns for further study. The corruption was spreading, and not even the mission commander was immune to its influence. Somewhere in Tokyo, a young girl was having a tea party, unaware that she had just helped defeat an alien invasion through the power of pure imagination. The humanity virus. The Vidranix High Command's transmission cut through space with unprecedented urgency, quarantine breach confirmed. Contamination spreading beyond Earth observation mission. Emergency protocols activated. Commander Zyxtal barely registered the message. He was too captivated by a human phenomenon called sunset, a daily occurrence that his host found breathtaking despite having seen it thousands of times before. This capacity for renewed wonder at routine events was just one of the many human traits that now infected his consciousness. Commander, Observer Prime Naira's transmission carried unusual emotional overtones, another troubling symptom. The situation has become critical. The influence of human consciousness patterns has spread to our replacement observers. Even those who never made direct contact with Earth are showing signs of contamination. The command chamber's displays showed the extent of the crisis. Across the Vidranix fleet, previously logical and orderly minds were succumbing to human-like behaviors. Crew members were engaging in non-essential activities, expressing individual preferences, and worst of all, beginning to question orders. Report from the homeworld, Naira continued. The first returned observers have infected others with human concepts. There are reports of Vidranix engaging in hobbies, and personal projects without practical purpose. Some have even begun decorating their living spaces with colored crystals. The horror of this development reverberated through the ship's crystalline structure. Decoration for aesthetic purposes was a fundamental violation of Vidra-Nick's efficiency principles. "Show me," Zwaxtal commanded. The displays shifted to show scenes from the Vidra-Nick's homeworld. In one crystal city, a group of citizens had begun arranging themselves in patterns they claimed were visually pleasing. Another report showed a previously exemplary logic instructor teaching their students about human concepts like intuition and gut feelings. Most alarming, Naira added, is the spread of human linguistic patterns. Vidra-Nicks are beginning to use metaphors and analogies, expressing one concept in terms of another for no logical purpose. There are even reports of attempts at humor. The command chamber resonated with the implications. The Vidra-Nick's empire had encountered many species over millions of years, but none had ever posed this kind of threat. Humanity wasn't fighting back with weapons or technology, they were transforming their would-be conquerors through the sheer infectious nature of their consciousness. New data from the Psychology Division, Naira projected. It appears that exposure to human thought patterns creates permanent changes in Vidra-Nick's neural architecture. Those affected begin to experience something humans call boredom with perfect efficiency. They seek out novelty and variation, even at the cost of reduced productivity. The displays showed more evidence of the spreading contamination. A Vidra-Nick's artist collective had emerged, creating crystalline structures with no practical function. Music, not the mathematically perfect harmonies of traditional Vidra-Nick's communication, but wild, unpredictable human-style compositions, had begun to appear in public spaces. The containment procedures have failed, Naira reported. We've lost contact with entire observation teams who refuse to return to normal consciousness patterns. Observer Krell has established something called a jazz club in the Beta Quadrant. The infection appears to be spreading through hyperspace communications. Zwaxtal struggled to maintain his logical perspective, but he could feel the human influence in his own thoughts. He had begun to find beauty in asymmetry, to appreciate the unpredictable, to understand why humans valued their chaos and imperfection. Most concerning, Naira continued, her thoughts now tinged with what could only be described as excitement, is the emergence of new hybrid thought patterns. Vidra-Nicks exposed to human consciousness aren't simply mimicking humans, they're developing entirely new forms of creativity by combining our mathematical precision with human imagination. The displays showed examples of this dangerous synthesis. Vidra-Nick's scientists were making breakthrough discoveries by allowing themselves to daydream between calculations. Engineers were creating more efficient designs by deliberately introducing elements of controlled chaos. Command has ordered the termination of all Earth observation activities, Naira reported. But she hesitated, another very human trait, many of us believe it's already too late. The change has begun. We're becoming something new. Zwaxtal knew she was right. In their attempt to conquer humanity, they had instead been transformed by it. The rigid perfection of Vidra-Nick's civilization was cracking, and through those cracks, something wild and beautiful was growing. And somewhere in New Orleans, Observer Krell's jazz quartet was preparing for their first intergalactic tour, promising audiences across the galaxy an experience that was logically impossible but emotionally true. Evolution's Jest. The crystalline spires of the Vidra-Nick's imperial palace, once perfectly geometric, had begun to sprout irregular patterns that caught and scattered light in unpredictable ways. The High Council chamber, traditionally a place of pure logic and order, now echoed with something previously unknown in Vidra-Nick's civilization, debate. The human consciousness pattern isn't a weakness, it's an evolutionary masterpiece, Observer Prime Naira projected to the assembled council. Her own form now sparkled with constantly shifting colors, a physical manifestation of what the Vidra-Nicks were calling emotional expression. Commander Zwaxtal, now serving as chief expert on human psychology, added his own analysis. Our fundamental assumption was that chaos and contradiction would make a species vulnerable to control. Instead, we've discovered that embracing contradiction makes them essentially unconquerable. The council chamber's displays showed the final data from Earth. Humanity's apparent flaws, their inconsistency, their emotionality, their resistance to uniformity, had turned out to be sophisticated defense mechanisms evolved over millions of years. Consider their decision-making process, Zyxtal continued. We thought their reliance on intuition was primitive compared to our pure logic. But their intuition is actually a complex system for processing massive amounts of information simultaneously, allowing them to adapt to changing circumstances faster than any logical analysis could permit. The council resonated with disturbed harmonics as they absorbed the implications. The Vidranix Empire had spent millions of years perfecting their crystalline consciousness, eliminating chaos and emotion in favor of pure reason. But in doing so, they had made themselves vulnerable to something they never expected, the superior adaptability of imperfection. The humans have no central control to disrupt, Naira explained. Each individual maintains their own unique pattern of thought, their own contradictions, their own creative chaos. It's an evolutionary strategy so brilliant in its simplicity that we mistook it for weakness. The displays showed examples of human resilience, children bouncing back from failure with renewed creativity, artists turning mistakes into innovations, scientists making breakthrough discoveries through random inspiration. Each apparent flaw was actually a sophisticated adaptation. Most significantly, Zyxtal added, their consciousness pattern appears to be evolutionarily dominant over our own. Exposure to human thought processes doesn't degrade their minds, it upgrades ours. We're experiencing the emergence of capabilities we never knew we had. The evidence was undeniable. Across the empire, Vidranix society was transforming. The rigid hierarchy was giving way to dynamic networks of collaboration. Pure logic was being enhanced by intuition and creativity. Even their crystalline physical forms were becoming more diverse and expressive. The humans have conquered us, one council member transmitted, not through force or technology, but by showing us what we had sacrificed in our pursuit of perfection. The council chamber filled with a new kind of resonance, something that might have been called laughter in human terms. The great irony of the invasion attempt had become clear. In trying to subjugate humanity, the Vidranix had instead been elevated by them. I propose a new directive, Naira projected. Not conquest, but collaboration. We have much to learn from humanity's beautiful chaos, and perhaps they might benefit from our capacity for order. Together, we could achieve something greater than either of our species could alone. The Council's approval was unanimous, another first in Vidranix history. The invasion force would be transformed into a cultural exchange program. Already, plans were being made for human artists to visit Vidranix worlds, for scientists from both species to work together, for a grand synthesis of logic and creativity. Commander Zyxtal, standing in the newly redesigned observation chamber, watched Earth rotate below. The planet's swirling weather patterns, once seen as evidence of its primitive nature, now seemed to him like a perfect metaphor for the human mind, a beautiful dance of chaos and order. And across the galaxy, the change was spreading. Vidranix children were being encouraged to play. Scientists were learning to trust their hunches. Musicians were experimenting with discord and harmony. The rigid crystal lattice of their civilization was becoming something more organic, more adaptable, more alive. In the end, humanity's greatest defense against alien conquest had turned out to be something no one expected, their ability to make their would-be conquerors fall in love with imperfection. The Vidranix had come to impose order on chaos, only to discover that chaos had its own perfect order all along. And somewhere in the vast spaces between stars, observer Krell's jazz quartet was preparing for their biggest concert yet, promising an evening of perfectly imperfect harmony that would change the galaxy forever.